Number 8. Russia's nuclear submarine graveyard. Decommissioning a nuclear submarine is complicated, dangerous, expensive, and time-consuming. This posed serious problems for Russia after the Cold War ended and the country scaled back on its military activity. Without the funding and resources to properly dispose of nuclear subs that were taken out of service, authorities dumped a plethora of radioactive garbage into the Kara Sea, where it remains to this day. There are at least 14 nuclear cores and an unknown number of submarines on the seafloor off the coast of Murmansk, amounting to thousands of tons of discarded radioactive waste, or roughly the equivalent of 6.5 Hiroshima bombs. Some of the reactors are still fully fueled and are corroding rapidly. But if the cool seawater comes into contact with the uranium inside, it could trigger a massive release of radioactivity into the environment. Experts agree that the only realistic way to prevent an eventual disaster is to remove the existing nuclear material from the sea. In recent years, Russia announced its plan to raise 2 submarines and 4 reactor compartments from the seafloor. It'll cost an estimated $330 million, and it will definitely be a good start, but it won't completely eliminate the radioactive dangers of dumped waste. Removing one of the subs will require a custom-built recovery vessel, which Russia said it had plans to design and start building in 2021, with hopes of finishing it by 2026. However, given Putin's current priorities in Ukraine and the country's questionable financial situation, it's unclear whether the project is underway or if the plans have changed. Number 7. Lake Erie shipwrecks. One of the world's largest collections of shipwrecks can be found in Lake Erie, which straddles the U.S.-Canadian border and is surrounded by New York, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and the Canadian province of Ontario. Experts estimated that there are somewhere between 500 and 2,000 wrecks resting along the lake bed and have identified 277 of them so far. In 2021, NASA engineer Kevin McGee told Earth Observatory that Lake Erie may have a greater density of shipwrecks than almost anywhere else in the world, including the infamous Bermuda Triangle. While the sunken ships are scattered throughout the lake, the Ohio Sea Grant Project has identified especially high concentrations of wrecks near the cities of Toledo and Cleveland in Ohio. Long-lost shipwrecks have also been located near the lake's islands, most of which also belong to Ohio. Unlike tropical and saltwater wrecks, the vessels that met their fate in Lake Erie are remarkably preserved, owing to the dark, frigid freshwater conditions they came to rest in. Divers have described finding extremely old ships that look like they sank yesterday. One of the lake's best-known wrecks is the 127-foot wooden cargo ship known as the Sultan, which sank during a storm in 1864. Unfortunately, only one crew member survived the incident. Rediscovered during the 1980s, the ship sits in 45 feet of water, situated just a few miles off the Cleveland coast. Lake Erie's oldest identified wreck is a 47-foot schooner called the Lake Serpent, which disappeared in 1829. It was located off Kelly's Island in 2018. While experts agree that not every shipwreck in the lake will be found and identified, lost ships are discovered every year, helping to answer long-standing questions about their fate. Number 6. Nouad Hibou Ship Graveyard. Located along Africa's northwest coast, the 37-mile-long Ras Nouad Hibou Peninsula straddles the country of Mauritania and the Western Sahara Territory. The eastern side, which is part of Mauritania, is home to the city of Nouad Hibou. With around 100,000 residents, it's the country's second-largest settlement. It also functions as a busy commercial hub and financial center. Nouad Hibou is also where you'll find the world's largest ship graveyard, which consists of around 300 vessels that are crammed along a narrow section of coastline. Its history dates back to over a century ago with the arrival of the cemetery's first vessel, the Chasseloup Laubat. Built during the 1890s, it was meant to aid France's cruiser force throughout the country's colonial territories. The Chasseloup Laubat was also built in response to the French military's growing fear about Italy and Germany's advancing fleets. After World War I, the ship was decommissioned and sold to a private owner. It was used as a floating warehouse and a water cistern before falling into disrepair, and it was later completely abandoned at Nouad Hibou during the 1920s. More boats came to the bay when the Mauritanian government ran into money problems. corrupt officials took bribes in exchange for letting ship owners ditch their derelict vehicles in the harbor. One of the graveyard's most famous wrecks is the 400-foot-long Moroccan reefer vessel known as the United Malika. The vessel ran aground in 2003, but luckily all 17 crew members survived and they were rescued by the Navy. The country lacks the resources to properly dispose of the boats at Nouadhibou, which were still accumulating as recently as 2013. Over the years, numerous proposals have been put forth in an attempt to find the best ways to get the ship graveyard cleaned up, but none of these proposals have ever made it past the planning stage. An increasing number of activists are calling for the mess to be properly dealt with, yet the government has yet to take action. Number 5. Outer Banks. Some of the world's most treacherous waters can be found off North Carolina's Outer Banks. This is thanks to the region's constantly shifting sands, its severe and sudden storms, and its unpredictable currents. One particularly dangerous part of this region, known as the Diamond Shoals, consists of a cluster of shallow sandbars that extend for 8 miles off Cape Hatteras. The shoals are thought to be responsible for as many as 600 of the estimated 3,000 wrecks along the Outer Banks that make up the appropriately named Graveyard of the Atlantic. While sailing through the Diamond Shoals, even the slightest miscalculation or navigational error could doom a ship. The region's earliest known wreck occurred in 1526, but the most destructive periods were during World War I and II, when the area became a hunting ground for German U-boats. At least 11 ships sank during the First World War, while as many as 90 ships, mostly Allied shipping vessels, were sunk by U-boats during the Second World War. Most of the World War II wrecks occurred between 1942 and 1943. This was before authorities imposed nighttime blackouts along coastal cities and ordered ships to zigzag while traveling to make themselves more difficult to track. And while German casualties in the region numbered far fewer than the Allied losses, not all U-boats made it back to Europe. Many of the wartime wrecks that came to rest in the graveyard of the Atlantic have been located and identified, but it's believed that there are plenty of others still waiting to be found. Which of these graveyards that we've discussed so far do you think is causing the most water pollution? Let us know down below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 4. Guanabara Bay. Just off the coast of Rio de Janeiro and the neighboring city of Niterói, Brazil's Guanabara Bay is filled with 51 deteriorating ships and boats that are leaking fuel and toxic chemicals into the water. Once home to lush vegetation and marine life, including a population of dolphins, the heavily polluted bay is now filled with raw sewage, massive amounts of garbage, and derelict rusting vessels that fishermen have to steer around as they navigate through the area. The Brazilian government has failed to make good on its past promises to clean up the bay. While civilians and activists continue to demand action, the mayors of Rio de Janeiro and its neighbor have passed the buck to the Port Authority, which operates under the Navy. However, it's unclear if or how environmental authorities play into the picture, especially since they've been reluctant to speak on the matter when contacted by the media. In 2022, a 660-foot-long bulk carrier called the São Luís broke free from its moorings during a storm. Blown by the wind, it crashed into the city's busiest bridge, bringing traffic in an already chronically gridlocked city to a standstill during rush hour. Built in 1994, the São Luís had reportedly been anchored at Guanabara Bay for around 6 years, pending the outcome of a lawsuit when the line holding it in place broke. Shortly after the incident, environmental activist Sergio Ricardo told Reuters that the ship was still in the bay. It reportedly contains over 55 tons of fuel, a concerning realization, considering the fact that the vessel looks like it's just one tiny rust hole away from springing a catastrophic leak and depositing its contents into the water. This may already be happening with some of the other ships and boats in the bay, some of which are partially submerged and have been in place long enough for trees and other plants to start growing from them. In addition to being a dumping ground for unwanted ships, dozens of tons of garbage are discarded into the water every day. The problem has been described as an environmental disaster waiting to happen, yet the authorities seem to be in no hurry to solve the issue. Number 3. Staten Island Boat Graveyard. Staten Island is part of New York City, yet some parts of it feel a world away. One such place, located near a landfill along the southern shore in the Rossville neighborhood, is the Staten Island Boat Graveyard. It goes by a few other names, including the Witt Marine Scrapyard, the Arthur Kill Boatyard, and the Tugboat Graveyard, but its official name is the Don John Iron and Metal Scrap Processing Facility. Family-owned since it was founded in the 1930s, the 24-acre site functions similarly to an auto salvage yard, where people go to obtain parts that they can reuse to repair other vehicles. At its peak, the scrapyard had an estimated 400 derelict vessels rotting along the shoreline, including historic boats that have drawn curious visitors for years. Today, there's around 100 boats at the property. Some are incredibly old and fascinating, but also very dangerous to try to explore. For safety reasons, the graveyard is closed to the public. One of the vessels docked at the site is the World War II-era submarine chaser USS PC-1264. It was the first U.S. Navy ship during the conflict to have a crew made up mostly of African Americans. These highly skilled and brave sailors forced the Navy to rethink its views about race. After the war, PC-1264 was sold for scrap, but it is yet to be dismantled. The scrapyard is also home to a New York City Fire Department fireboat called the Abram S. Hewitt, which operated from 1903 to 1958. The side-wheel passenger steamboat P.S. General Slocum, which caught fire and sank in the East River in 1904, can also be found here. Number 2. Landavenic Ship Graveyard. Along the coast of northwestern France, near the commune of Landavenic, there's a ship graveyard that primarily consists of military vessels, along with some civilian ships. The area's military history dates back to 1840, when a naval station was established for the sake of storing mothballed ships. The vessels had been taken out of service but were maintained in case they needed to re-enter service on short notice. Around 200 sailors were stationed at the base at any given time, ready to sail out on a moment's notice if duty called. During World War II, Nazi occupiers took over the station. After the conflict ended, the site no longer functioned as a storage facility for operational ships, but as a place for disarmed ships that would most likely never be used in active naval service again. Some are utilized as breakwaters or as training ships, while others were simply forgotten about. Landavenic has also served as a final stopping point for some vessels before heading to the scrapyard. The nearly 600-foot-long naval missile cruiser Colbert arrived at Landavenic in 2007 after falling out of use as a museum ship. Built during the mid-1950s, the vessel saw its only combat when it served in the Gulf War in 1991. It remained at Landavenic until 2016, when it was towed away and scrapped. The Soviet-built Kometa hydrofoil was also based at the site for some time, while providing passenger service to the French island of Ushant during the summer. But unfortunately, it's unclear whether the boat is still stationed at Landavenic. And at number 1, Gulf of the Farallones Graveyard. In the decades following the start of the California gold rush in 1848, prospectors hoping to make an overnight fortune flocked to the area by both land and sea. Those who came by ship had to sail through a treacherous 1,300 square mile area of the Pacific off the northern California coast before reaching San Francisco Bay. But sadly, there were some who never made it to their destination. As many as 300 ships from before, during, and after the gold rush have wrecked in the region, known today as the Gulf of the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. In 2014, scientists explored a handful of wrecks in this largely unexplored region. Located near the rocky Farallone Islands, roughly 30 miles from the Golden Gate Bridge, the sites represent just a fraction of the ships that litter the floor of the Gulf of the Farallones. One of the wrecks, a high-speed clipper ship called the Noonday, sank while ferrying amateur gold miners and supplies from Boston to California in 1863. The team of researchers detected the Noonday's presence with sonar, but couldn't see it when they dropped a remotely operated camera into the water, suggesting that it became buried in sediment after it plunged to its watery grave. However, they had better luck finding the 380-foot-long cargo steamship SS Selja, which slipped beneath the waves in 1910 after colliding with another ship called the SS Beaver during a heavy fog. The scientists were surprised by the amount of damage to the Selja, which was found lying on its side with its hull broken into multiple pieces. Today, it functions as an artificial habitat for marine life. Given the largely unexplored nature of the region, many, if not most, of the wrecks in the Gulf of the Farallones have yet to be discovered and identified. If you had the chance, would you explore a sunken ship graveyard? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.